Welcome or welcome back to everybody. We're glad to have you here. And as I was saying, a number of you have been here before to see Hy Mariampolski's wonderful presentations. Hy and I have known one another for many, many years through our qualitative research organization. He's been an academic and a market researcher on ethnography, which means observational research. So he's watching you right now, right, Hy? And in retirement from that, he has become, well, he's collected postcards for many years, but that's become much more of a full-time occupation for him. He has a book that he plans to publish on it. He has thousands of postcards, and I have to say, having gone collecting with him, they are in pristine condition. They're really wonderful with stories to tell. So Hy, I'm going to let you introduce the topic today, and we turn it over to you. Hy, it's all yours now. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Judy. And for me, it's a pleasure working with you again. And as you say, it was a pleasure working for many years together. And in our downtime, both Judy and I went to various flea markets and antique shops, and I indulged in postcards, and Judy indulged in her collecting passion, which is clocks. So, and one of these days you ought to see Judy's clocks. So forget about my postcards. Welcome to all of you. Welcome to friends from CLNL and friends from the Metro Postcard Club of New York and the Wichita Postcard Club, and everyone else, ships at sea, as they say. Today's presentation is on night spots, and it covers a particular moment of New York history. Let's call it the period of time between the end of Prohibition and the beginning of the rock and roll era, which covers roughly the end of the Depression and the war years and the immediate post-war years up into the early 60s. Very important period of time for communications and the arts. And one thing we can say is that New York City at that period of time was the worldwide leader of all the arts. It was the worldwide leader of musical entertainment. And one of the things that was distinctive about New York at that time was its nightlife culture. And the postcards of the era, I think, are one of the best sources to do research on its nightlife culture, because this was, let's say, the second tremendous postcard boom in the post-war years, during the war years. For postcard enthusiasts, you probably know this as the height of the linen era. The linens being a particular form of postcard printing, which was patterned and textured. Being a good social scientist, my first inclination is to ask the question, why? Why was New York such a tremendous, why did this boom happen in New York? And what was going on in New York? Well, let's say that number one on the list is the fact that New York was unscathed by World War II. Unlike many other traditional nightlife cities like London, Paris, Berlin, Vienna, they were heavily scathed. And other night spot towns what beyond the 60s would become nightlife towns had not yet been established. Las Vegas was not yet established. Havana was a little bit off to the side. Miami was not established. So New York was then the hub. It was the transportation hub. It was the place where that was still the center of the world for transportation. The ships came in there, the trains came in there. So it was a place where people could congregate and meet. Let's remember that during the war, this was very important because many soldiers had traversed New York during overseas when they were moving overseas. So soldiers, officers, military contractors, they all had a custom of going through New York during the war years and were eager to come back to New York in the post-war period. But they had a tremendous level of comfort. There was also tremendous immigration to New York. The war produced tons and tons of refugees. I was a little ounce of one of these refugees myself. There were many artists and musicians that came to New York at that time, and New York was the place where they all ended up. New York was so New York had the ready labor force. It had the people to populate the orchestras, and it had the stars that didn't feel comfortable in their home countries that came to New York. And New York in that wartime era, that post-war era, was a really open city. And I'm sure many of you remember it was a place where, well, as Cole Porter said, anything goes. New York had several well-established nightlife zones during the post-war years. The three prominent nightlife zones that we'll see reflected in these postcards were Times Square, Greenwich Village, which are still both nightlife zones, and 52nd Street. 52nd Street has died as a nightlife center, but during that wartime era and the post-war era, 52nd Street was jamming. It was a place where a lot of musical creativity was happening, and as we'll see, this was happening especially in jazz. This was where the Bebop era was putting out its music. There were lots of other places in New York that opened up for nightlife during the war. The Lower East Side and Harlem were very famous for their nightlife, and there were many other places that opened up. The other thing that happened was that the hotels themselves were active in the production of nightlife, and almost all of the major hotels, as we'll see, had very active nightclubs working within them. And the idea was, hey, all these people were coming, and the more time you could keep them in the hotel, the more profit could be made by the hotel. So it was not just the nightlife zones, but it was the hotels that were actively both promoting and producing nightlife. Nightlife was vigorously promoted during the war years and the post-war years, and we don't We don't think about these kinds of guys anymore, but every newspaper had a nightlife reporter, had a what we now call a gossip columnist. And some of these reporters were tremendously popular and were tremendously active in promoting both their own nightclubs and nightlife in the city in general. Probably the most prominent of these was a guy named Walter Winchell. Walter Winchell, his voice is still heard if you watch late night reruns of The Untouchables. But Walter Winchell held forth at table number 50 in the Cub Room at the Stork Club. And from there, he made and broke careers and famously feuded with lots of people. Sometimes the feuds were considered racist. For example, he had a big fight with Josephine Baker and big fight with Lena Horne, but he was kind of the ace of gossip reporters during the era. The other one, which I'm sure more of you know about, is Ed Sullivan. Ed Sullivan was the gossip columnist who held forth from from El Morocco. And he was, let's say, a tremendous source of gossip and had numerous contacts, which he then was able to mobilize in producing his own television show. Ed Sullivan himself, for those of you who remember, was probably the worst speaker, the worst announcer that ever lived. He was a very boring person, but he was able to get all the great acts because of all the work he did as a nightlife reporter for the New York Daily News. Walter Winchell worked across the street at that time at the Daily Mirror, and Daily Mirror and the Daily News were in stiff competition. But eventually, Ed Sullivan was able to get many of his nightclub acts on his TV show. His TV show was great, and it was great in terms of the spectrum of music it presented. You know, in my household, whenever Jan Pierce or other operatic singers came on, everybody had to be still. There were other, you know, this was the era of gossip reporting and nightlife reporting. Some of you may remember Drew Pearson, Washington Merry-Go-Round, and he was eventually taken over by Jack Anderson. This is when Washington gossip began as a career. And some of you may also remember Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons. They were the famous competitors who did Hollywood gossip. And Hollywood gossip at that time was synonymous with New York gossip. It was just the other end of it. Radio, TV, and LP recording were gaining in popularity throughout the nightclub era. And during the early phases, these were not competing, but were supporting the nightclubs. The nightclubs sponsored radio announcers inside their clubs. They reported on goings on at the various nightclubs in New York. Early television supported the nightclubs. Early LP recording supported the nightclubs. You know, there were lots of recordings of various performers at Birdland or any of the other clubs. So at first, these were supportive of the nightclub culture, but eventually they began to compete, and it eventually changed. This was a great time for music and a great time for performance. And New York has accepted all styles, as we'll see in this presentation. Classical music, swing, bebop, country western, folk, Latin, Brazilian, uh, um, early rock, and traditional styles like German oompa bands and Russian balalaika. Everything was available, and everything was supported. So even though various styles tried to predominate at that time, folk tried to, folk was a big mover. Latin was a tremendous mover, but these were all uh, available and popular and had their own following. And folk had its own section of Greenwich Village, for example. McDougal Street and Bleecker Street were folk. Outside of McDougal, 3rd Street was jazz. It was each of these styles had its own following and its own couple of blocks of predominance. So let's answer the question. You've got some people coming to New York, and you've got to pick a place to go. The first thing that comes to your mind, maybe let's go to one of the big 5 clubs, what I call the big 5 nightclubs of that era. And number 1 of the big 5, the Copa. Everybody had to think of the Copa as one of their top choices. The Copa had the great acts. It was very well located. It had a fabulous place. It was well supported by the mafia. Mafia had a high degree of control over its labor force, so there was no concern about strikes or anything else shutting down the Copa. And this looks like this postcard is the main card published by the Copa to attract customers. Looks like a little bit of a Carmen Miranda look. And Copacabana is, of course, the famous neighborhood of Rio de Janeiro. This was reinforcing that idea that this was Brazilian, but it did not have necessarily a Latin or Brazilian theme. It featured popular entertainers, and everybody passed through the Copa. Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. But Copa was definitely on the top of everybody's mind. But as this card says, you had to be ready to pay. Minimum charge was $5, so couldn't be a slacker at the Copa. And I was thinking, gee, if the minimum was $5 and maybe maximum was, maybe it suggested a bill of $15 or maybe $20 per person. So for $100, you could get that party at that time for what sounds like a pretty reasonable price. By the way, they changed the minimum every couple of years, so it's a lot of fun to keep these Copa cards and notice the different price points that they were applying. And the next one on your mind, of course, El Morocco on the Upper East Side. El Morocco headed Sullivan as the primary reporter. And I have a personal El Morocco story. You see these banquettes and upholstered chairs and upholstered walls. And as many of you know, my dad ran a little upholstery shop on the Upper East Side in Yorkville. And he came home for dinner one night astonished. He was an immigrant to America that who'd had a very hard life in Europe, but he he said, I can't believe America. What happened then? He said, I got this job today, and the whole restaurant, I have to upholster the whole restaurant with zebra leather. And and as you can see, all these walls and banquettes were upholstered with zebra leather. And I think of my dad working on this, and the astonishment he felt that, oh boy, he can't believe that a place like this exists. But Morocco was the other club that you would have considered to set up your gathering at. And I feel a certain nostalgia looking at this, thinking of my dad working on this. It's makes me laugh. And the next club would have been the Latin Quarter. Recognized that they were a great place for a banquet, just ideal for a banquet. Glorious shows, good food, moderate prices. The Latin Quarter was owned and run by a fellow named Lou Walters, who was a club impresario, both in New York and Miami. And Lou Walters, let's say he was a pretty straightforward guy, but he had a daughter who she said in her autobiography that she practically grew up at the club and knew all of the performers at the Latin Quarter. And Lou Walters' daughter was Barbara Walters, who later became a major force in into entertainment and news broadcasting in New York. But Latin Quarter tried to recreate this Parisian licentious atmosphere, girls, dancers, showgirls, sexy music, sexy shows. And this is one of the Latin Quarter cards that appeared at that time. And the other was this one, New York Nightlife at its best. Hours of glorious shows and dancing. Just ideal for a party or banquet. It's a good marketer who recognized the idea of promoting the place for these get-togethers that were taking place after the war. And you can feel some of the glamour, the excitement, the costumes, the sexiness. It's nightlife at its best. Or another place to consider among the top 5, the Rainbow Room, Rockefeller Center, the top of the Rock, the top of 30 Rock. What a place. Fabulous views of the entire city. Dancing, tremendous entertainers, and the chicest, at that time, the best designed club there was. And I know the Rainbow Room was active into the 80s, and even I went on occasion to the Rainbow Room to entertain a visitor from out of town. One of the entertainers featured, well, up at the Rainbow Grill, section of it was the Rainbow Grill, but here's Duke Ellington, probably one of the most interesting Art Deco design postcards in postcard history. Just and I love the rainbow across the cummerbund. It tells you everything that the Rainbow Room, Rainbow Grill was, and it was chic. It was It was Art Deco when Art Deco was at its height. And rounding out what I call my top five, the Store Club. Store Club. Store Club was the celebrity hangout par excellence. This was when famous stars, Elizabeth Taylor, Marilyn Monroe, went there to meet the Kennedys and the Rockefellers, and Vanderbilts hung out together, danced together. Let's say in a few cases did a bit more than dancing, but the Store Club, that was another great venue. One thing for postcard collectors, these nightclubs at this time, many of them produced many multiple cards, and used postcards at that time as a form of interpersonal marketing. You came to the club, you filled out the postcard. Sometimes the club mailed it for you to whatever destination. And this was personal influence marketing at its best. You were able to write those cards, tell your friends that you were hanging out at the Store Club. And here again, a glamorous image, a tuxedo, an evening gown. The Store Club published. I've been collecting Store Club cards for a long time now, and I have 31 cards, different cards from the Store Club, many of which illustrate the beautiful cover models that decorated the lobbies of the Store Club. But many of these other clubs also published multiple cards, and just keep up what we call continuity marketing. You've had last year's postcard, you got to get this year's postcard, and personal influence marketing. The Store Club was again the scene, club table number 50 in the Cub Room. The Cub Room was the sanctum sanctorum of the Store Club, but at table number 50, there was Walter Winchell, and Walter Winchell might have been broadcasting from the Store Club that night, or might have been collecting notes on who was doing what with whom, and he told all. At the end, the Store Club got into labor trouble. It was relentlessly picketed. They had an anti-union policy, and it was significant in leading to their downfall. Nowadays, what happened was that the Store Club sold its building to CBS, which was building a building nearby and needed some extra height rights. And they took the building and turned it into a little park, what we in New York call a vest pocket park, called Paley Park. William Paley, Bill Paley, was the head of CBS at that time. And the Store Club was torn down. And today, if you want to inhabit that airspace, you sit in Paley Park and think about when it was the Store Club. There's another club that Times Square Club that I think of as really kind of a special place. And this is Jack Silverman's International, which tried to compete against the Store Club. And I was looking at some of the stars that were featured. Jack Silverman himself had been a restaurateur on the Lower East Side, And you may remember some of the postcards of his Lower East Side Jewish restaurants. But he had higher aspirations, and he developed this club concept that kind of kept alive the old vaudevillian tradition, musical acts and comedy. And Silverman had a lead on a lot of these Jewish acts. The Barry sisters. So the Barry sisters were two Jewish girls who tried to keep alive the musical style of the Andrews sisters when they did By Mere to Shame, the greatest Yiddish hit of history. And the Barry sisters, some of you may remember their own biggest hit was Oy Mama bin ich verliebt, which means, oh Mama, am I in love? Oh Mama, am I in love? But Myron Cohen, he was another, started out as a Yiddish comedian, and kind of translated his act to English. If you've ever heard a joke about garment trade manufacturers, it was probably originated by Myron Cohen. And of course, Sophie Tucker, the last of the Red Hot Mamas. So a card that I love that shows you some of the range of acts that were appearing in Times Square. We'll see many more acts as we continue and look at the what was going on at some of the hotels during this period. And at Nikki Blair's Carnival, which was in the Hotel Capitol over in Times Square, the comedian Milton Berle was the featured entertainer. And some of you might remember Milton Berle at that time. He says he's public comedian #1, but he had the #1 program on TV at that time. And I know in my apartment in Brooklyn, we were one of the early adopters of television. And on Monday nights, when Milton Berle was on television, the entire apartment building came down to our apartment so they could watch Milton Berle. And he was, let's say, really funny. I simply lost my head over him, said Marie Antoinette. He was at the Carnival. Let's go on and look at some of the other acts and other venues that were popular as nightclubs during this era. And I described to you before the linen postcard, which was textured and where you could get these very curious range of colors. It was particularly effective with the primary colors, the reds and the yellows and the blues. And this is a beautiful linen postcard depicting the Royal Palm roof at the Biltmore. Biltmore was a fabulous hotel close to Grand Central at that time. Terrific meeting spot. The clock of the Biltmore was a place to meet, but this was the Royal Palm roof at the Biltmore with the orchestra and dance floor. And if the Royal Palm roof didn't work for you, you could try the plantation room at the Hotel Dixie, where The featured performer was Al Traced and his Silly Symphonists. Hotel Dixie was also in Times Square. And as you could see, New York tried to appeal very widely to all comers, and a little Southern humor was not um, excluded. I don't. I would imagine that the Silly Symphonists played mostly country or Western or Southern kinds of hits. Southern swing, Western swing. This is another linen card, again, that shows you the kinds of colors and the particular surface texture of the postcard. And the next card, moving on to Hawaii, Ray Kinney's Orchestra and the Aloha Maids over at the Hotel Lexington, which is still on the east side. The hotel, the Aloha Maids wearing their proper leis, everybody properly wearing leis, and this was there was a little bit, as we'll see in some of these other clubs, there was a little bit of a Hawaiian trend that was coming on. Hawaii had been heavily hurt by World War II, but it was also one of those places where a lot of GIs went on their way to Pacific theater of war, and they picked up a love for Hawaiian music. So there were clubs in New York that catered at that time to the beginning of the Hawaiian music trend. Hawaiian music became especially popular in 1958 when Hawaii became a state, became the 50th state of the United States, and became increasingly more important. The next card shows another view of the Hawaiian room. Again, very stylish. And this is a later image, the 1950s image, but it's very stylish, and again, continued to offer a Hawaiian music program. And you think the hotels are going to stop here? No, there were more hotels. There were more hotels, as the next card shows. In Times Square, you could go to the most luxurious restaurant with no cover charge at all at the Paramount Hotel. This is the Paramount Hotel Grill, which also featured a host of stars. I have another postcard. I'm not going to show it in this session, which features a famous band leader of that period performing at the Paramount Hotel. His name was Ozzie Nelson. Those were the kinds of acts, and again, very, very stylish. Here's another Art Deco masterpiece, interior masterpiece. This is no cover charge, gang. Unlike the Copo, where you got to pay a minimum. So if you've got that gang you're hosting, you better you might consider this at the Paramount, or you might go to the Sheraton. And here's a great image that depicts the kind of uh, freedom-loving licentiousness that was characteristic of the early 50s. We're at the Sheraton Lounge. Where are you? Well, I don't know, Lexington Avenue 37. I'm taking the Lexington Avenue bus. I'm on my way, and there's no shortage of beautiful girls. Again, the Hotel George Washington, the 23 Club at the George Washington Hotel, which had kind of a well, let's call it a patriotic theme, and the Washington Hotel was on 23rd Street, right across from what's today called Baruch College, but back then it was called Baruch School of City College downtown. And when I took classes at City College downtown, the Hotel George Washington was the place to go to loosen up after class. This is another fabulous linen card, great colors and great Art Deco design. Of course, the Hotel Pennsylvania. The Hotel Pennsylvania roof garden, Hotel Pennsylvania, that had a song named after it. Da, 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 da. The Hotel Pennsylvania, I'm sorry to report, is being torn down. It has been condemned and is, as we speak, being torn down. It's one of the city's great landmarks. It was formerly right across the street from the Pennsylvania terminal. And when I was in college, I had a job for a while, and it was in an office, but it was located inside the Hotel Pennsylvania. And from my office, I could see them tearing down Penn Station, and it felt awful. It was just a horrible sight. And now the Hotel Pennsylvania itself is being torn down. This is a wonderful card, wonderful design, and again shows the Art Deco sensibility of the war years and the post-war years. I'm sure everyone remembers the Hotel Astor and the Hotel Astor roof garden. Hotel Astor was the central hotel in Times Square, occupied an entire block. And some of you may remember, some of you may have been there, but it had a roof garden at the top, which occupied that entire block. And Hotel Astor was a beautiful place in this resplendent French architectural style. But it too became a victim of the wrecking ball eventually. But here I've given you some of the hotels that had nightlife. The Hotel Astor roof garden had orchestras and places to drink. And there in the distance is New Jersey and the rest of the country. Another hotel that had a very active nightlife operation was the Waldorf Astoria. And as many of you may know, the Waldorf Astoria used to be at 34th Street and 5th Avenue. And eventually in the late 20s, that building was torn down to make way for the Empire State Building. And when the Empire State Building was built on the old Waldorf Astoria site, the Waldorf Astoria moved to its current site on Park Avenue and became the chicest hotel on Park Avenue, New York's chicest hotel. The tower at the Waldorf Astoria was the place where many people lived. For example, Douglas MacArthur. That's where he lived in the tower at the Waldorf Astoria. But one of the great band leaders that played at the Waldorf was Xavier Cugat. Xavier Cugat was well known for his introduction in New York of the mambo. He was the one of the leaders of what came to be known as the mambo craze. That music, Cuban music. Cugat himself was Cuban, and together with that other Cuban who appeared on the #1 television show of that period, who everybody knows was Desi Arnaz, were both influential in bringing Latin music to New York nightlife. Cugat himself was also a bit of an artist, and they not only let him dominate the room with his music, but his caricatures also decorated the walls of the Waldorf Astoria lounge. You can see the dance floor there. I remember the Waldorf Tower personally because I remember my rich uncle came to New York and was staying at the Waldorf Tower, and I was told, boy, I'd better be on my best behavior when we went there to meet him.
Can I just say something quick about the Waldorf? It was very close to where I grew up. They, as you probably know, Hy, but maybe other people don't know, they had a special entrance for the cars, the limousines of the presidents. And it would take them in an elevator built for those huge limousines. It would take them up to their suite and I think to the ballroom. And the ballroom had enormous conventions that you would know the number better than I, hundreds of people. And as a clock lover, this beautiful, wonderful clock down on the first floor. Of course, all that's changed now. But anyway, wanted to mention that.
Judy, I did remember that you lived up near the Waldorf, and you also were a kid who grew up in hotels. And I remembered that Douglas MacArthur was one of the people that was one of your neighbors here at the Waldorf Tower. The Waldorf had many additional rooms that were used for their conventions. They tried to be a major convention and meeting destination, and their ballrooms were decorated by many prominent muralists. For example, Jorge Cert was a muralist that decorated a few of their other ballrooms. But this was the Cugat ballroom that was Xavier Cugat at that moment was married to what was her name? Lane.
Her name was Abby Lane.
Abby Lane, who was the best looking Jewish girl in history. So,
And Sharrow.
and later married to Charo. And I remember
Coochie, yeah.
Coochie. Cugat was very popular on TV. And
Yeah, we'll let you go on because we know you've got a bunch more postcards. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay. The 21 Club introduces us to 52nd Street. And 52nd Street was the major entertainment district of the period. This is Jack and Charles 21 Club, one of the first denizens of that street that made its reputation. This was, I don't know, Judy, this was collector's paradise, wasn't it? That's how I remember it, because everybody had their collections. And one of the collections at the front entrance was the lawn jockey collection, which was very startling. But inside, the walls were decorated with people's collections. And the 21 Club had been a speakeasy before Prohibition ended, and it was a prominent 52nd Street destination. But let's look at some of the others. Henry Fink's Club Samoa. Good place for music and dancing. And Club Samoa had a jazz band. But Club Samoa also featured strip teasers. It was also a burlesque joint, as we'll see. Oh, this was probably the most famous club on 52nd Street, Birdland. At this moment featuring Ella Fitzgerald, but Birdland named after Charlie Parker, Charlie Yardbird Parker,
Right.
and was a very famous venue for the top in bebop acts. There was a terrible incident here while it was during that period. Miles Davis was performing here, and he was on a cigarette break standing in front of the club, and there was a New York policeman that saw him there, thought he was a vagrant, and beat him up. And this was a terrible racist thing that happened. If you read Miles Davis's autobiography, it was one of the worst things that happened in his life. But Eddie Condon's was another famous, very prominent jazz club on 52nd Street. Eddie Condon's also lasted into the 80s. Remember being able to go there into the 1980s. Let's go through some of these other jazz clubs. Kelly's Stable at the gateway to Swing Lane. 52nd Street had a few nicknames, and one of them was Swing Lane. And here's Winnie Garrett at Club Samoa, the flaming redhead. She's having a little trouble with her dress, keeping her dress on. The 52nd Street was famous not just for its jazz, but also for striptease and burlesque. And many of these cards of stripteasers on 52nd Street are highly collectible. The Onyx. Here's another beautiful linen card. The Onyx was another place that was popular for both jazz and burlesque at that time. Leon and Eddie's. Leon and Eddie's had numerous popular acts, and here's their winter and their summer decorations. I keep trying to recognize the differences between winter and summer and why they would make that a point of differentiation, but okay. And here's another one from Leon and Eddie's, Joey Adams appearing at Leon and Eddie's. with Tony Canzoneri, a boxer at that time, who was trying to break into comedy, but unfortunately died young and didn't. And Edith Piaf at Cafe Versailles. There were numerous clubs that tried to differentiate them by bringing in the biggest stars. And I don't know, many of you remember that Edith Piaf was probably the most popular French performer of the World War II period. She sang the songs that made the French feel good about themselves during that period. And in the aftermath of the war, she came to New York to perform. She was the mainstay at the Cafe Versailles on the East Side. There were other clubs that specialized in the stars. The 400 restaurant in Midtown Manhattan, Fifth Avenue and 43rd Street. That kept up a program of showcasing the era's greatest music stars. Louis Prima was considered the #1 drummer. I'm sorry, Gene Krupa was considered the #1 drummer at that time, and was featured in this postcard. Benny Goodman, also at the 400 Club, playing his clarinet. Biggest star of them all, Frank Sinatra, performing regularly at Rio Bamba, again on the Upper East Side. This was before Frank moved on to Las Vegas and became the mainstay of the Las Vegas performers, but he had his regular spot at Rio Bamba. So some other stars. Basin Street East, some of you might remember this. This club lasted into the 60s, but this was a showcase for the stars. Ella Fitzgerald, Benny Goodman, Louis Armstrong. But you might also see another guy at the corner here, Mort Saul, who was today considered probably the creator of stand-up improvisational comedy. Mort Saul was a guy who came to New York from San Francisco. He had gotten his start at the Hungry Eye in San Francisco. But Basin Street East also tried to maintain a regular program of the top performers of the period. Some of you mentioned sports bars last time. I thought I'd include a few sports bars of the era. And this is Jack Dempsey's at Times Square, meeting place of the world. He also wanted to be sure that you remembered that it was a place to get together with crowds of people, and many people did go to Jack Dempsey's. Jack Dempsey was a popular boxer, and after his boxing career, moved on to being a nightclub impresario. Pretty fancy bar there. This was an interesting club. Some of you may remember this, the Diamond Club at Shea Stadium in New York. And this was a showcase for what has come to be known as mid-century modern design. And this was a place to meet if you had friends that enjoyed baseball. Take them to Shea Stadium and spend some time at the Diamond Club. Is the Sportsmens Cafe close to the old Madison Square Garden. Again, a great card of the linen genre. We talked before about Xavier Cugat and the Mambo craze. This is El Chico, club in Greenwich Village where the Latin dance craze began. Well, at least they claimed it. This was where it began. I hope some of you are followers of Postcard history. It's an e-magazine that appears regularly, but I've done several articles now on New York nightlife for the magazine. I'm finishing one up right now on the Mambo craze and where that happened and the clubs that were involved and what that meant in terms of New York social history. This is El Chico, beautiful Spanish decor. Bill Bertolotti, another place that made Greenwich Village a tremendous place for nightlife. And 3rd Street in Greenwich Village, it was 3rd Street and Bleecker Street, McDougal Street, Sheridan Square. These were all over on 6th Avenue too. These were all places that were filled with nightclubs. And I'm going to give you sort of a cross section of New York City, of Greenwich Village nightlife now. Bill Bertolotti is probably one of the oldest nightclubs there. And then there was places like Club 66 with great murals, great what we call moderne design. Club 66 and Ernie's Three-Ring Circus, another place with streamlined modern design and great murals, great art, performed terrific music. And of course, Cafe Society. Cafe Society was an interesting place, and another place that produced many cards. Cafe Society was started by a guy named Barney Josephson, a Jewish guy from New Jersey who had started as a shoe salesman, but wanted to be a jazz impresario and became one. Founded this nightclub, Sheridan Square. And he was, Greenwich Village was known for its, let's say, social revelry since the turn of the century, and had many artists and writers who lived down there. What Barney Josephson did was he invited some of the local artists to do murals for the nightclub. And he paid them $125 plus an equal amount in food and drink to do the nightclub's murals. And then what Barney did to promote the nightclub was to put the murals on postcards and make that his point of differentiation and a marketing tool that he used. Here, he was a cartoonist. In fact, he was one of the New Yorker's most prolific cartoonists. I read a statistic that between 1931 and 1975, Sid Hoff contributed 571 pieces to the New Yorker magazine. And he had this mustachioed character who's performing in his skivvies there, doing a fan dance, and everyone is looking very insouciant. But this is an example of Captain Stubby and the Buccaneers. The Village Barn was another place in Greenwich Village that had a country western format and featured country acts, acts from all over. I have a few Village Barn. And Village Barn was another place that published dozens of postcards, and many people collect Village Barn cards because there's just so many of them, and that feature these very hokey looking country acts. I've got another one here. This is Paiute Pete, who used to call square dances and lead games like musical chairs and hat games at Village Barn. Definitely a place where you might meet someone. Village Barn also featured comedians. Lou Mosconi, some of you may remember Lou Mosconi, and he has a comedian at the Village Barn. Swing Rendezvous, 3 shows nightly. Heart of the Village. And I like this because it kind of shows you a typical Greenwich Village street scene. And cozy bar. Wish you were here. Swing Rendezvous. We said that New York was open to all kinds of music. Opera had a flowering in the early 1950s. This was the Astor restaurant, and it was a great nightclub because at any moment the staff and the waiters might break into an operatic aria. And the entire restaurant was devoted to the theme of opera, and they would bring in performers, actual performers at times, and otherwise the waiters or the busboys would break into a chorus. Nick's of Greenwich Village, another jazz club at the time. In the 1980s, this transformed itself into a country western format, and I went there a few times when it was a country western format. And I don't remember its name, but we'd appreciate if anybody does know it. Club Savannah. Greenwich Village was also known for its burlesque clubs and its strip joints. And Club Savannah had the unique point of differentiation of featuring African-American dancers. Well, if all that didn't satisfy you, there were some other places on the fringes where you could go. Tropic Isle, on Flatbush Avenue in Brooklyn, the nightclub that was again featuring the Hawaiian theme, but wasn't shy about showing breasts. What's particularly unique about this postcard, which is a linen postcard, is that it is embossed. And it's embossed in, let's say, 2 places. Balalaika in the Carnegie Hall building, featuring a Russian theme. Some more out of the way places. The Tavern on the Green. Tavern on the Green, I'm sure everybody was invited at one time or another to a party at Tavern on the Green. A great place, which unfortunately was discontinued. But there are a couple other great places. Ginza Ginza was a place on the east side. But there are two things here that are unique in this chrome postcard. First of all, it called itself a discotheque, and it was Ginza was one of the first places that called itself a discotheque. And this also had go-go girls. This is the oldest postcard I could find that featured go-go girls. Sammy's Bowery Follies. Sammy's Bowery Follies was one of these unique places that could only happen in New York. What we call a dive bar on the Lower East Side, where during the day it would just be a bar for alcoholics. It was on the Bowery, which was then Skid Row in New York. And the alcoholics would sort of stay while the crowd from uptown would come down to the Lower East Side and continue would stay while everyone else was partying. This was called slumming. And for many years, this is where slumming was the feature. And my last card is a place called Club 82, also on the Lower East Side. Club 82 was New York's first and, well, most important club that featured cross-dressers. And you could probably tell, maybe not, that those appearing in this photo as females are actually males, and those appearing as males are actually females. And a great place that showed what New York used to be. So wish you were here. Thank you.
Well, hi, we're very grateful that you were here. And we thank Hal. Wonderful, wonderful postcards. And in particular, the Art Deco. I mean, they must have invested quite a bit of money, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
do you know
yeah.
anything about, I mean, they took it very seriously. So I want you to answer that, and then we'll call on Eleanor has a question too. But, tell me about how they spent money on this.
Well, it was always a major form of investment, and
Mhm.
I personally benefited from, but I'd love to answer questions.
Yeah, go ahead, Eleanor, if you can unmute. Mhm.
Yeah, thank you, Hy, so much. It's brought back so many wonderful memories, and we could have a huge sociological discussion about where these places went. And the only clubs that you could see are the ones for the kids, dancing by themselves. Anyway, I just wanted to say that I worked at Gray and Davis, part of Gray, and that one of my accounts was the Rainbow Room.
Terrific.
Yeah, second in command. And it was a great experience. As again, I wasn't the major account executive on it, but I used to help out. But it was so fabulous. First of all, they had other rooms where I had many client presentations to the press. So that's how they made their money, the kind of money that they spent there. And I was so in love with the place that my husband and I used to meet every week after work, not to eat necessarily, but to have drinks and just
go dancing.
And we would take clients out there for dinners, very special clients.
Yeah, it was one of those places.
Wonderful. I mean, it doesn't exist anymore today. I don't know of any. I looked it up and they're closed. Tavern on the Green, you say, is closed.
Yeah.
What has taken their place for adults? I mean, not kids dancing around and transsexuals and all that. Is there anything really that's around today like that?
I wish there was. That's why having this archive is so precious. It's an indication of what we lost. It's an indication of what could be. And the Rainbow Room, it's very special to me too. I also took clients there because clients from overseas were always so impressed.
Very impressed, yes,
and,
always.
but I had a young friend. Uh, he he said, "Oh, gee, his lifetime dream had been to go to the Rainbow Room with his wife." And I said, "Okay, come on." I said, "We're going to do it up in style." So we got a limo and we went to the Rainbow Room. We took the limo to the theater. We saw a show, then took the limo back to the Rainbow Room. It was one of those New York.
Fantastic, a real New York evening.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
Thank you
A
so
lot
much. I love this. I really did.
A
Thank
lot
you.
of glamour. And there was Roseland, which is a little bit lower class. So there's a comment in chat that I think probably expresses feeling for a lot of us from Marilyn about loving great presentations. She loves the background stories, especially your dad upholstering the zebra chairs at Morocco. Yeah.
I know. For my
So
dad,
I think whether or
my
not we
dad,
got to go there, it was great.
for my dad, it was like a miracle before his eyes.
Yeah.
It was beyond his ability to understand.
Yeah. Well, again, we thank you so much for the wonderful vicarious experience. Keep on collecting and keep on showing us great things. So, and again, we thank Hal and Alan for all of their help. So thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.